Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. For those who don't know, my name is Brian Hunt, and this is my show. And we talk a lot on this show regarding risk and lots of different factors. And we do have a heavy concentration in construction and real estate because of my background. But, the construction and real estate sectors are just part of the subsectors of the overall economy. And when it comes to learning about the economy, that's where people look towards economists to try to come up with some ideas or solutions where it's going. And I've been fortunate the past couple of years where I've attended a number of trade association meetings here in Dallas, North Texas. And I've had the distinct pleasure of seeing our next guest in action, Dr. Anirban Basu. It's very rare where you get the opportunity to see an economist who's smart, but also is funny. And that's where I've been paying attention to our next guest here for years. And, subscribe to a Substack video. I try to catch him whenever he comes to Dallas when I can. Just a wealth of knowledge, information, and is truly one of those few people I know that can take economics and make it entertaining. And so without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to add Dr. Anirban Basu to the show. Dr. Basu, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for coming on. Like I said, I've had the pleasure of meeting you in person and seeing you live. And I just think you're one of those rare individuals that can take, a complex information and make it entertaining with a nice dosage of pop culture references, which I appreciate as well.
Well, I need to simplify it to understand it. I think a lot of economists try to excessively complicate matters to make people believe that they know what they're talking about or can predict things that they cannot predict. I admit that there's certain things I cannot predict, and I have not predicted them, and I try to keep things as simple as possible.
Well, I think you do a hell of a job. So obviously there's a lot of questions I think me and the guests who we're watching have for you. But before you can jump right into the current state, I'd really just sort of love to talk about your background, sir, as far as, where'd you grow up? And I say that, and I think another pop culture reference I can make is, if we're playing the game, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Where in the world is Dr. Basu today?
Well, right. Now, today I'm in Baltimore, as it turns out, which is where I've been living since 1992. However, I grew up in Kankakee County, Illinois, on the Indiana border, about 70 miles south of Chicago, a farm town with a couple of hospitals that attracted my father, as it turns out, to Kankakee County. Lots of foreign medical graduates ended up in such towns. A lot of the American medical graduates preferred the Chicagos, Boston, San Francisco's, LA's. So a lot of the foreign medical graduates ended up in the Peorias, Kankakees, and so on and so forth. And that's where I grew up. And then went off to school on the East Coast, and I've been on the East Coast ever since.
Yeah. So, just looking at your profile here on LinkedIn is rather impressive. If I understand the follow, did you start at Georgetown University for your undergraduate? Is that correct?
That's correct. That's true.
And when you went to Georgetown, did you know you were going to study economics, or did you kind of fall into it?
Oh, no. I went to the School of Foreign Service. I thought I was going to be part of the State Department.
Okay.
And I had a mentor, a guy named Howard Schaefer, former ambassador to Bangladesh. And he mentored me for a number of years. And he said at the end of my senior year of college, he said, don't go to the Foreign Service. I said, why? Why not? Because you're interested in Asia. Okay. And at that time, there was lots of concern in the Foreign Service about loyalty to America. Oh. And because I had such an interest in Asia, particularly South Asia, the State Department probably would not have put me in South Asia. They probably would have put me anyplace else to make sure I was loyal to the nation, those kinds of things. Now, these days it would be different, because of linguistic background. They want people who have some cultural familiarity with regions to be in those regions. But back then it was different. Cold War was still raging, so on and so forth. So, I thought I was going to the Foreign Service. And then when I didn't go into the Foreign Service, I was trained for nothing. So that led me to graduate school.
Okay. Which led you to the Harvard Kennedy School. Is that correct?
Right. A way of finding myself, a 2-year program, Harvard Kennedy School. And that's when I discovered that I was good in economics. It was a 2-year program, as I say. And the first year you took micro and macroeconomics. Well, I scored the highest in the micro sequence.
Wow. And
so they made me the TA for the second year. And then I scored highest in the macro sequence among my classmates. So they put me as TA for the macro sequence as well. So I knew I had some ability in economics. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I determined that I would go into economics.
And from there, it took you to the University of Maryland. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did a master's in economics there. I was already working full time, but I was able to go to Maryland and pick up a master's degree, and then that led me to more graduate education.
Which I believe was next came a law degree, correct, from University of Maryland, followed by Doctor of Philosophy at University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Yeah, that's right. I got the PhD at UMBC, and prior to that, a law degree. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer. So, I mean, economics was fine, but I was working in a university setting. I had sort of hit a peak in terms of earnings and titles, so on and so forth. So, yeah, maybe I'll be a lawyer. But then, as it turns out, my consulting practice in economics took off while I was in law school. And so I've just been an economist ever since.
And so, well, I mentioned this on your post, but so tell quickly, who are your clients and what are they looking to help get from you as far as guidance on where the world's going? And I mean, obviously, it's all about trying to some sense of where to go and deploy capital. So how do you help your clients?
Yeah, sometimes it's guidance with respect to the world is going. So, for instance, many of the nation's leading general contractors come to me to ask about where interest rates headed, where's the deal flow going to be, what regions are going to be hottest, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, our clients are trying to achieve something and something is standing in their way. Okay. So they might be trying, if they're a developer, they're trying to get a zoning modification, but the zoning board is standing in their way. Or if they're an energy supplier and they want to build a power plant or, commission a dam or whatever it happens to be, somebody is standing in their way. And so our job is to write about the economic and fiscal consequences of what would happen if they got their way, if the development moved forward, if the investment moved forward, to try to educate policymakers about the positives and the negatives. We're not advocates. We're not supposed to be advocates. We're economists. So we just do the analysis. Okay. But sometimes there's a thin line between advocacy and economic analysis. If you conclude, my goodness, this project would create 5,000 jobs in Central Maryland or 5,000 jobs in the Chicago area, wherever it happens to be, then, the policymaker looks at that and says, well, if I find this to be credible, that's going to make me more favorably inclined toward allowing this project to move forward. So that's all. I do a lot of litigation support, so lots of lawsuits, okay. It's calculating damages, that kind of thing. So often it's a client trying to achieve something, but they need some economic analysis so they can achieve that thing.
Sounds perfect. So for everybody who's watching the show, as we have our conversation with Dr. Basu, if you have a question, and if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you see my picture next to an oval. Please go ahead and type in your question, and as long as you keep it appropriate, I will bring it to Dr. Basu's attention. So Dr. Basu, let's jump right into it. The jobs report came in last week, and which we have right here, and I took this off your post from LinkedIn. Positive gains, but what's the current pulse of the economy right now with respects to job growth?
Yeah, these headline numbers in terms of jobs continue to come in hotter than anticipated. You can see from the chart there, 275,000 jobs added in February, according to the initial estimate from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment, however, rose 3.9%. And the jobs numbers you're looking at there are from the establishment survey, the survey of employers. There's a different survey, the survey of households, and that indicated that in February, the nation actually lost jobs. And there were significant downward revisions in the establishment survey to prior months. So my take on all of this is that, in fact, the employment market is slowing down. What we've really seen recently is a loss of hiring activity. So the unemployment rate nationally is about 3.9%, but if you look at the pace of hiring, and other economists have found this as well, then the pace of hiring is more consistent with a 5.5% rate of unemployment, that kind of economic environment. We also have seen more layoff announcements recently. Now, layoff announcements don't immediately necessarily translate into layoffs, but the notion is more layoffs are coming, whether in technology or financial services or some other segments. And so my sense is the labor market is softening, which is good and bad news. Bad news for job seekers, good news if you're the Federal Reserve, you're worried about inflation and interest rates, because if the economy is slowing along with the job market, that makes it more likely that inflation will be benign and that they can go ahead and start reducing interest rates, let's say some point this summer.
And that leads into the next sort of question I have for you, which you've addressed, I think, in prior presentations. And I can't show my website right now, but there's an article right here in the Dallas Morning News. Headline is, why do so many Americans think the economy is bad when the data says otherwise? And I say that with unemployment is, less than 4. Rates are at, say, high compared to where 3 years ago, but they're not high historical. If anything, they reverted to the mean. Is it a sense that people don't have a sense of their history, or it's all about what's in front of them versus where it is in the sort of in the overall timeline of the economy, that it's really from those of mine who I've gone through recessions in the 1980s and 1990s, it's not that bad.
Oh, it certainly is not. I mean, macroeconomically, as we pointed out, 3.9% rate of unemployment, ongoing job growth, 8.9 million available unfilled jobs in America. So despite the fact that the number of job openings has fallen recently, still quite high by historic standards, we've seen significant wage growth. So in the February jobs report, year-over-year wage growth was around 4.3%. That's pretty rapid by historic standards. We've seen significant percentage wage growth among the lowest income earners, people working in hotels, restaurants, for retail, so on and so forth. That's where we've seen some of the highest percentage growth in wages and compensation. I mean, minimum wages of $50 an hour, around the country in many states, and yet people don't even blink at that because, not too many people work for less than $15 an hour anymore. So you would say, my goodness, economy is great, stock market record high. Yeah. And yet people are really frustrated. What is the number one factor that has people frustrated? It's inflation. It's the fact that prices are rising off an already lofty level. So we economists like to say things like, hey, inflation is falling. It is. It has been falling. That's true. What was 9.1% on a year-over-year basis in June of 2022 is now 3.1%. But prices have really risen significantly since roughly early 2021. And so people feel they're on a hedonic treadmill. They're earning more money, but they're having to spend more money on groceries, on transportation, on all kinds of things. So they're not moving ahead. They're not getting ahead. And they're feeling more stress. And what we see is that many Americans actually take on more credit card debt to try to deal with all these high prices, to try to maintain those living standards, and they're getting into trouble. So if you're a macroeconomist, you say the economy is great. But if you're a micro person, head of a household, you're looking and saying, I got issues still. I'm not that happy about them.
But wouldn't it be, from a macroeconomic standpoint, just a textbook, we're looking at higher interest rates, but that's a effect for a very long period of time. We had quantitative easing, had very low interest rates. And so if any sort of this textbook, when money's free, that has upward pressure on prices. And we're seeing the effect of that. Isn't this sort of just how the cycle works?
It is, but let's keep in mind that the cycle is strange in the following sense. So yeah, it is true, for instance, very recently that the 30-year fixed mortgage rate has been around 7%. Let's just take that as an example, 7%. Okay. But if I've got a fixed rate mortgage, 30-year fixed rate mortgage at 2.75% or 3%, what do I care where mortgage rates are right now? I'm benefiting from my low fixed rate that I've fixed on during the pandemic, early stages of recovery. The other thing about it is sometimes high interest rates are good. Let's say I'm a retiree. For many years, I couldn't get any yield from the bond portion of my portfolio. I couldn't get income. So I had to dig into my principal to afford my lifestyle. But now I can get 5%, more than 5%, depending on what bond we're talking about, corporate or otherwise. And basically risk-free in many cases. Investment grade corporate bonds, municipal bonds, so on and so forth. I can get a nice return, and so that high interest rate is actually helping me generate more income. And again, whether you're a retiree or a non-retiree, it's lovely to have income. So there's a positive aspect to high interest rates as well. So it is really quite bizarre, I'm sure, to many macroeconomists. Why are Americans so upset? Why are they upset with the current president? Why are they upset with anything? Yeah. They're upset because high and rising prices, and people are having a tough time keeping up. Their apartment rents have gone up massively. Their grocery bills have gone up massively. It's more expensive to go to a restaurant, so on and so forth. Airfares have gone up over time. And so you put all that together, frustration. Yeah.
Well, we got our first question, so I'll bring it to your attention. Here's a question. What does Dr. Basu think about Wall Street CEOs and FANG directors selling a large portion of their stocks? Does this line up with the idea that we can see a rate lift around the summer season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a leading indicator when you've got insiders selling stock, right? I mean, do they know something that we should know? Are they selling something because they're more pessimistic, or are they selling just because they're Jeff Bezos and he's living a fabulous lifestyle? So he sells $4 billion of Amazon stock in a few days. Does that mean that Amazon stock price is going to go down? I don't think so necessarily. I think he just spends a lot of money. Yeah, he's living the life. He's living my life as friends. I had envisioned that when I was a teenager, that kind of life. Anyway, setting that aside. Look, I mean, I think what you have generally seen actually in the last few years, even though the question is about CEOs selling stock, what you've actually seen are a lot of companies buying back their stock.
Okay.
We've seen massive stock repurchases, and that's one of the reasons that we've seen this massive tilt higher in equity prices, both in 2023 and the early stages of 2024, is because these companies are buying back their shares, fewer shares outstanding, the price of every share goes up, and that's how a lot of these companies are using their free cash flow. So I think generally speaking, CEOs are quite confident about their corporation's performance. Obviously, you can find exceptions to that, and are actually, through their corporate decision-making, whatever they're doing with their personal stocks, through their corporate decision-making, are expressing that confidence in part in the form of those share buybacks.
Okay. Dr. Basu, I mean, obviously with the world of economics, and as I like to refer to insurance and risk, there are interdependencies. You can't come up with a 30-second slogan to solve a problem. So one of the problems you talk about, and you addressed this in prior times, is job openings, and that there are still 8 million job openings. And take on top of that, you've got the baby boomers who are now retiring or on the verge of retiring. And if you look at the demographics since then, Peter Zion's big into this as far as declining birth rates. There just aren't enough people behind the baby boomers coming up to fill the spots. And if you typically have to find more people, immigration is one of those areas you find that. But that is very much seems like it's topic number one right now, as far as what may be causing a lot of anxiety or fear, however you want to put it, that's driving the presidential election right now. You want to take that in bits and pieces as far as let's talk about just the fact that retirement ages. We got the baby boomers retiring, and we'll take it from there.
Well, that's exactly right. I think the statistic has been 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 each and every day.
Wow.
And many of them have headed now into retirement. I mean, the oldest of that group is now in their high 70s. This is a group that has been wildly productive. I mean, much of America's prosperity is owed to the baby boomers. I mean, it's owed to other generations too. Don't get me wrong. The generation that saw us through World War I and the Great Depression, all those kinds of things. But the baby boomers, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, created just so much wealth, and that they continue to build on that wealth. They became very corporate in their middle years. And they have positioned America at the commanding heights of many of the most important industries, whether it's health technology and biotechnology or rocket science or whatever it happens to be. A lot of that is because of the baby boomers. They've created enormous amounts of wealth. But now that same group, as productive as they have been, is retiring. Mm-hmm. And they're leaving the nation or the workforce at least, to Generation X, my generation, which is also known as the baby bust generation. There's just not many of us.
Same here.
Right. Brian, you're exactly right. So, and then, of course, after us is another large generation, the millennials. But the millennials are different, aren't they? Mm-hmm. They might not have the same goals as the baby boomers did. The baby boomers, at least later in life, want to make money. And that's been very good for the economy, frankly. The millennials seem to strive for things like work-life balance, and that's a shorthand way of saying not much work, in some instances at least. Yeah. And then after that, you have the children of the Generation Xers, our generation, the small generation, the baby bust. That's Generation Z. That's the youngest members of the workforce, born between 1997 and 2012, according to a conventional definition of that generation. Many of them are still in school, as it turns out. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear what they're going to look like either. But here's the thing. I think they're going to be a very productive generation, as it turns out, that generation. But it's a small generation. So America demographically is set up for some very strong years as the millennials come of age. It's a very large generation. They're going to get lots of wealth from their baby boomer parents over the next few years as they're in their prime spending years. So actually, that's one of the reasons I have a good outlook for the economy in the late 2020s. I think it'll be the roaring 20s and the late 2020s. But thereafter, we have some real issues because we have smaller generations that reach their prime age, and there's not enough of those people.
Yeah. And so then where do the people, all these job openings, who's going to fill them? And then at least if I look at my interactions with millennials and Gen Z and what I understand, not many of them, especially you think about demand, STEM is not exactly on the top of their list as far as the type of industries they want to jump into, nor is it, say, in construction or manufacturing. A lot of that generation wants to be content creators, and I should probably keep my mouth shut because I'm basically creating content right here with you, but this is not going to be my full-time job. So in as you and I have talked before in the past, but also it's, you work with construction, and construction has always been a source. I mean, for labor comes from immigration. And whether you want to be point blank, down here in Texas, a lot of maybe with documents or no documents, that's for sure. And if we're going to be this push to like crush down on immigration, which I think we all would agree, the system's been broke and it's antiquated to not meet our needs. But if we're tightening off the spigot for labor, that can only have inflationary pressures on current labor, right?
Oh, that's right. But we have not turned off the spigot.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how we view the southern border. People have different opinions on this. I mean, you're in Texas, I'm in Maryland, so I'm sure that our perspectives are different on this. I'm quite sure. But that is a potential source of human capital, isn't it?
Correct.
But when you say the system is broken, you're right about that. But what really is broken is Congress, and Congress's inability to define coherently what immigration law is. Who can work? Under what circumstances? When are visas issued? Who's deported? Who's not deported? And of course, this all relates to undocumented migration. We also have issues with respect to documented migration, legal immigration. And Congress has been woeful in defining the rules of engagement for various people, whether employers or people coming to this country, people coming on student visas, whatever it happens to be. It's been sloppy. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons the nation is falling short of its potential. I don't know what the right answer is. And no one's going to be happy with whatever answer is proffered, right? So some people want everyone deported. They won't be happy unless everyone who's here in an undocumented fashion is deported. Other people say, no, we need pathways to citizenship. They're hardworking people. They've come here. They're dreaming for better. We want to take care of them. So they want them to take care of us. And we need them to work in construction and manufacturing and logistics and so on and so forth. We need to pay them to pay into the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund, pay down national debt. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to tell you, but you have to first define as a democracy what immigration policy is and how it's going to be implemented. We haven't done that. So it's really messy, sloppy out there. And my guess is that a lot of people out there, a lot of employers are taking advantage of this undocumented worker. By taking advantage, I don't mean exploiting them necessarily, but I mean taking advantage of their presence.
Correct. Oh, I think that's always been the case. I think it's, at least down here in Texas, it's always been sort of the unwritten rule. Like, I can tell you there's a difference as far as margins respects to commercial construction versus residential. And I'm confident to say you could go to an average job site in residential construction, and if you were to pull the workforce, you're going to find a lot of it's undocumented. But that is because we're still always, I think from my perspective, as far as a consumer, we as consumers on a retail level, price is a very much a sensitive thing respects to housing. You don't want to pay more than you have to. And as a result, I think there's a under the table pressure for owners and general contractors to get labor that's relatively cheap. And that's where undocumented workers come from. And I think the whole system is, my perspective is sort of broken in the sense that you have green cards and you have permanent status, but you have like migrational for labor respects to agriculture, or even like there are programs where college students can come over here from Europe and work on ski resorts for a fall or summer for a year. But there's never seemed like the ebb and flow as bringing, we need X 100,000 this semester, this quarter versus 200 next quarter, and a way for people to go back and forth. They could get the labor, we could tax them, but then if they don't have a job, then they have to go back, because it just seems like it's such a antiquated system for the common economy that we're working in today.
It absolutely is. It's preposterous. And, people play games. Now, one of the things that you've heard, perhaps from the last two presidential administrations, is there's been more enforcement of work sites. Over work sites, meaning that the penalties for using undocumented workers is greater than it used to be, and that there's more scrutiny of employers, and I-9 audits and these kinds of things. That's what people hear. And yet I think because there's been such a difficult time recruiting workers during the pandemic and early stage of recovery, for instance, that many employers have just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, I don't know if I'm breaking the law or not, but I have to turn to these workers because they're able to supply effort. I can afford them. I can build homes that people need at a price that they can afford. And if I don't have these workers, I can't do that. Yeah. And so there's a practical aspect to that, isn't there? In addition to the profit motivation. And so, again, it's up to Congress to define some of these things for us so people understand the rules of engagement. Otherwise, people make up their own rules. And that's exactly what we see, and that's sloppy.
Yeah, and I your Congress point I take up because I remember you were down here at the TEXO event. I loved your line as far as, and I will agree with you. I would argue that Congress people should get a higher salary so that you could fire the guy who's currently in the Congress and replace him with your neighbor down the street who you think is pretty solid, but just can't have the money because it's not a cheap job. I mean, as far as the transportation and housing, it ain't cheap. That's for sure.
No, I mean, usually the people who run for Congress are already independently quite wealthy. Mm-hmm. To run a campaign, to contribute to one's own campaign, so on. So there are grassroots efforts out there, but you look at some of these Congress people; they're incredibly wealthy. Mm-hmm. We have someone running in Maryland for the Senate position, U.S. Senate, David Trone. He's incredibly wealthy. That's not a criticism. He's accomplished a lot, but it's that wealth that allows him or positions him to run. So. What can I tell you? I mean, it is a very broken system, and my goodness, it would be a totally different discussion talking about the effect of money and the influence of money in Washington, D.C. We probably want to stay away from that, but of course, we know it's there.
Yeah. Well, I'll also pull back for a second, since I would love to have you specifically tell the crowd who's listening to this how Social Security is in jeopardy based upon our demographics and how we're funding, because as the board, the trustees have Social Security said by 2030, unless there's any changes, everybody's looking at a 20-25% cut in benefits because of the current tax rate and the declining number of people paying into the system. Can you maybe just briefly talk about how that's going to play out?
Yeah, it's not that far away, right? The early 2030s, the most recent trustees report indicates Social Security insolvency. As you pointed out, it's a 20-25% cut in benefits. It's not going to happen, by the way, Brian. Because what's going to happen is that money will be taken from the general fund and poured into the Social Security Trust Fund to make it whole, and that will, of course, increase the national debt. So for many decades, of course, as you know, the government has been borrowing money from the Social Security Trust Fund to fuel spending, to finance spending. Now we're going to see the reverse, which puts even more pressure on the overall federal government's finances.
Yeah, and
we're in trouble.
No, and I think you just touched on the point that people don't seem to understand. If you actually looked at historically the deficit numbers are actually bigger, but the government has been taking money from Social Security and borrowing, and with notes, and then take that money. So it's a house of cards, from a financial perspective.
It's an over $34 trillion national debt. I mean, you would think that one of the aspects or implications of divided government would be less spending. Right, they can't agree on what to spend on, so we get less spending. Nope, there is no fiscal discipline whatsoever in Washington, D.C. I mean, let's put it this way. Every year, the federal fiscal year begins October 1st. So we now have data at this moment that I'm speaking with you for the first quarter of the federal fiscal year. And during that first quarter, the federal budget deficit was over $500 billion in 3 months. I mean, people talk about American exceptionalism. One of the reasons our economy is performing better than, let's say, Europe's or Japan's or other parts of the world is because the federal government is putting forth a stimulus package every 3 months. So we've got all this aggregate demand stimulation from the federal government, and meanwhile, that national debt continues to go skyward. And at some point, the federal government is really going to have to refinance its debt into higher interest rate instruments. So the debt service is going to climb massively, which is why I think this nation is headed for a financial crisis at some point in the 2030s, a period in which you can no longer borrow from the Social Security Trust Fund. You have to put money into the Social Security Trust Fund. And so while the 2020s is a great decade for infrastructure spending, for tax credits, for manufacturers and others, the 2030s could be quite dry along that dimension. And the economy could have some real problems at that point.
Yeah, and I know you know this term. I guess it was being kind of popular before the pandemic. The concept of the modern monetary theory, which basically, if it's a fiat currency, you can print all you want. It doesn't matter because you're like fiat currency. And I just thought that was the dumbest idea since New Coke, because you're the fiat currency because you like the Lannisters, you pay your debts, but if you keep running out these deficits, there's going to be a time when people are going to question whether or not you can pay your debts, and then the bond vigilantes will be coming back saying, no, we're not going to take 5%. You're going to pay us 7%.
Yeah, so that modern monetary theory is pretty interesting, right? I mean, it's crazy talk in my mind. But what it says is that if you have the resources to build something, let's say you want to build a road, and you have the workers to build that road, modern monetary theory says as long as you have the resources to build the road, you can build it. It doesn't matter how you finance it. It doesn't matter if you borrow. As long as you have the resources to build it, build it. And I have said that's sheer nonsense, because as long as creditors care to be repaid, then debt matters. So, my mortgage on this house I'm in right now is with First National Bank of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
It got sold to them. Who knows? Okay, so when First National Bank of Pennsylvania sends me a letter saying, Anirban, you've been paying your mortgage all these years, 12 years now. We're so proud of you that we're going to forgive the rest of your debt. We don't care. When they tell me that, I'll say, okay, maybe monetary theory makes sense. But until I hear the creditors don't care to be repaid, debt matters, and we have too much of it.
Yeah, it was like the old saying goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially when it comes to debt. Right. So again, if you're sitting here watching our conversation, Dr. Basu, and you have a question for him, please look to the bottom right-hand corner. You're going to see my picture, and next to it is an oval that says add a comment. Please go ahead and type your question there, and as long as you keep it clean, I'll bring it to Dr. Basu's attention. So we're talking about a lot of depressing stuff, Dr. Basu, and so let's bring up another topic that may be positive or negative, depending on how you look at it. I'm just about completed with the coming away from Mustafa Suleyman with respects to AI, and it's fascinating. And it's exciting, but it's also a little bit on the scary side too. Would you, from your perspectives, where do you see AI being as far as what sectors of the economy do you see it changing? Do you think it's not going to change any area? How do you think it improves our lives or maybe makes things a little scary?
Oh, it's anything that involves information transfer or analysis will be massively affected. So financial services. Right? Lots of information transfer, lots of informational analysis. What do I need a stockbroker for? I probably, the stockbroker probably is someone I haven't needed for a couple of decades now, but I don't need anyone to create my 60-40 portfolio for me anymore, right? Any human being. AI can do it better. So, you can imagine now, I do not need, a travel agent necessarily. AI can book all of my travel, my hotels based on my preferences, what I like. To be on the water, off the water, whatever it happens to be, in Hawaii or wherever it happens to be, can do that. So you can imagine a lot of disintermediation because of artificial intelligence. So there are a lot of people here, software developers, coders, also stand to be displaced in many instances by AI. And I think, some of the industries that stand to benefit the most are leisure and hospitality. Why? Because with AI, we're going to have so much leisure time in a few years. That's my prediction. That we'll be wanting to travel a lot if we have the money to do it, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to really alter our society. Now there are all kinds of unintended possibilities out there as well, right? So cybersecurity issues, of course, that's the scary part. We've all seen the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, right? On this, the robots take over and all those kinds of things. It is scary, but in terms of if it's allowed to be accommodated smoothly by the economy, it's going to make us much more productive. Particularly those of us in white collar work. Hey, it doesn't help the bricklayer.
No,
right? That doesn't help the stonemason. But it helps the architect, it helps the engineer, it helps the economist, helps the financial services professional be more empowered, be more productive, and therefore enjoy more leisure time ultimately.
Yeah, because I've been telling people, like, I'm in insurance world, and with the how insurance is done and procured and negotiated for the insurance brokers and the carriers, I can tell you it's a highly antiquated model. And it's highly inefficient. And I believe, and I tell the younger kids who I work with, I said, learn AI as much as you possibly can, because it's going to disrupt my industry. And you want to be the guy who understands it versus the person who doesn't understand it and loses a job. Because, the whole premise, like say efficiency, I can see the time where a client takes his policy and uploads it to an AI engine and says, please compare my policy for inadequacy coverages for construction. And boom, it'll pop something out faster than I could maybe just sitting there looking at it for 4 hours. But if I understand it, hopefully I can utilize that to be more efficient. But no, I think it's prime for disruption, but also I'm pretty clear. I made a comment to conference and construction. It's like, it's going to be a while before some robot walks up into your attic and replaces your HVAC system. That's going to take a while before AI takes that over.
That's exactly right. But what AI can do for that HVAC company, at least, is to think about, okay, here's the situation. Here's how much space we have to work with. Here are the other systems. How can we optimize this for the customer along the dimensions of price, functionality, stamina of the system, meaning how long it's going to last. Lots of benefits here. And you're absolutely right, Brian. One wants to be on the right side of the AI curve as opposed to the wrong side. Wants to be empowered by it as opposed to displaced by it.
Yeah.
And I'm already pretty impressed by all the knowledge out there among many people with respect to how to prompt various AI platforms, how to get from those AI platforms the information one wants. It's pretty impressive. It's something that can be learned broadly by society, but you have to take the time to learn it.
Yeah, I mean, I harken back. I'm still, I say I'm a reformed CPA. When Excel first came out, I mean, it wasn't like it made jobs a lot more efficient to have technology for an Excel spreadsheet that you by hand would take forever. Now you can knock it out within hours. Didn't say accounting jobs went away or finance. It just actually made them more efficient and actually be able to do more versus the old way. So, I mean, with technology comes improvement, but there's always the impact. Some industries can do better, and others are going to get impacted more versus others. So, it's like anything else. Once technology gets out of the bottle, it ain't going back in. So, Dr. Basu, you travel the country quite a bit. I'd love to get your perception as far as we've talked here macro level as far as the economy. Where are you foreseeing, or where do you see things with it across the country as far as what areas do you see doing better than others? Where do you think some are going into a change in shifting of demographics? And I'll make an example. Detroit has been taken hard economically for years, but is also now one of the fastest, as far as percentage increase in housing. It's one of the fastest growing average price for homes. I can see that it bottomed out, and people have invested now to try to get at a good price. Where do you sort of see things across the country if you're breaking down by states or sectors?
Yeah, so I think first you start with cost of living, because many Americans are struggling with the high cost of living. And so there has tended to be a migration towards, and this is unleashed by the pandemic in particular, a migration towards less densely populated, less expensive communities. So, why are people willing to live in San Francisco? Because their job is there. That's at least historically what it's been. My job has been there. I have to live in San Francisco. It's very expensive. But now with remote work or hybrid work, I can have a job in San Francisco and live in Sacramento or Reno or Boise or something like that and have a lower cost of living. Or maybe, I live in an exurb very far away from the center city or the more expensive suburbs because I commute in just 2 days a week, whatever it happens to be, but I'm freed from that. Mm-hmm. I can enjoy a lower cost of living. That's what we've seen. And as part of that, we've seen this general migration from the northern United States to the south. And you can find northern markets that are exceptional: Boise, Idaho, Columbus, Ohio, mm-hmm. and some others that are really doing quite well economically, Grand Rapids, Michigan, but Indianapolis, Indiana. But generally speaking, the hot markets are in the American South, and I think it's going to stay that way. It's Nashville, it's St. Petersburg, Florida, it's Miami, Florida, it's Orlando, it's Austin, Texas, of course, Phoenix, Arizona. Now, these places are becoming more expensive too, but they offer often lifestyles that younger families like, they aspire to, hiking and biking and these kinds of things. And in a way that some northern cities that have been fully built out don't. And so I think you will continue to see that migration from north to south. Apartment rents are high. That's one reason people are moving to the south. Apartment rents are generally lower in the south. Mm-hmm. And the other reason is because, many of these millennials in particular aspire towards home ownership, can't afford a home in Boston. Who can? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Seattle, forget about it. But maybe I can buy a home in the Dallas metropolitan area. And by the way, no region of the country is adding more people per year than Dallas Metro.
I know. We're projected, I think, by 2030, Dallas is going to be the third largest metropolitan area, surpassing Chicago, which is, I can tell you, we're on that path. That's for sure.
Chicago, by the way, is a mess.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because I really, in the past, I've enjoyed Chicago, downtown, Wrigley during the summertime. Winter's another story, but it is the downtown area has become a mess.
No, they still have the most beautiful skyline in North America, I think, and Navy Pier and all those kinds of things, the beach. There's a lot to say about Chicago. Chicago is a lovely town, but lots of out-migration of people and wealth from that city and that region right now, and so they need to put that back together.
Yeah. So one aspect of the migration that obviously we've seen I see here in the South, in the recent article, Wall Street Journal, places like Albuquerque, Orlando, Phoenix are becoming very popular. But the flip side is that people moving south, but this is probably the area of the country that's going to be most impacted and is starting to get impacted by climate change. To the point where Phoenix, there was a suburb, I think, an article not too long about how they were cutting off residential construction because they weren't convinced they had access to water for now and going into the future. And then whether it be, Tampa, which is booming, but then obviously it's on the coast, you're susceptible to high wind. Do you think, and you think about this, obviously, the market as a way of adjusting itself might take a while. But do you see a concern from an economic standpoint, long-term, short-term, to having people moving to the south, but they're moving to the areas that are most susceptible to climate change. And we talk about wildfire, water access, high winds, because you're building up more concentration of assets in these areas. But then as a result, you're seeing these hurricanes come through. It's a bigger impact versus what it was, say, 10 years ago.
Oh, no question. I mean, I was just in Tucson, Arizona. I gave a presentation recently in Las Vegas, Nevada, and they're all talking about water. What's going to happen with the water? And can we continue to support this growing population? But people are strange, Brian. They do things that you don't expect them to do. So, for a long time, we've talked about, people talk about, oh, California's going to fall into the sea and the San Francisco earthquakes. People still moved to San Francisco, by the tens of thousands once upon a time. Yeah. Not so much recently, obviously. San Francisco's fallen on tougher times, but, people moved to California. Yeah, earthquakes be damned. So people do strange things. They know that Florida's been hit by several hurricanes. They're still rushing to Naples and Marco Island and so on and so forth, aren't they? Yeah. Because people want what they want. Yeah. And so it doesn't stop them. Now, at some point, communities or local governments, for instance, can stop them and say, no, we're not going to issue any more permits. Fine. And then, obviously, people can't do what they necessarily want to do when governments say enough is enough. Yeah. And I think at some point you are absolutely correct. It's going to take a very long time, but that migration to the south slows because of climate change in part, because of issues related to water and natural disasters, so on and so forth, and also because cost differentials are starting to close. So Dallas has become more expensive than it used to be. Phoenix has become much more expensive than it used to be. Yeah. Austin certainly has become much more expensive than it used to be. Yeah. It's not as expensive as Manhattan or something.
No, but still, yeah.
Still, the gap is closing.
Yeah.
And so, the incentive to leave behind a Connecticut or someplace like that is less than it used to be, perhaps. And so, I think at some point, even though in the near term I continue to expect to see that southern migration as people look for affordability, at some point that affordability quotient declines, and all of a sudden more people just say, you know what, I'm staying in Michigan.
Well, it's funny too you mentioned that, because obviously I work predominantly here in the Southwest, and I tell people Dallas is getting such a large gravitational pull that's getting larger and expanding north and south. And now, like to your point, where maybe it's not as cheap to be in Dallas anymore, but you know what, I can go. Like one place I tell people all the time, if you could buy stock in a city, you'd buy in Waco, Texas, because you're sitting halfway between Dallas and Austin. You cover both towns in an hour and a half, and you're starting to see a lot of development there on the waterfront. And then same, I would say, to like Oklahoma City or Tulsa, where you're still within a good 3-hour drive from Dallas, and you got people coming there for cheap markets. So the market has a way of adjusting, but this doesn't happen overnight, that's for sure. So,
I think you've nailed it. That a lot of those towns. I gave a presentation recently adjacent to Texas Tech University.
Okay, yeah.
Which happens to be in the 11th largest city in Texas. Mm-hmm. And that place is doing very nicely, in part because of the value proposition. The cost of living is quite low. Yeah. And so, when you're talking about a Waco, you're talking about Baylor University or something like that, that's an amenity that draws people in and of itself, but also that lower cost of living. You mentioned Albuquerque. Albuquerque has some street level issues, as it turns out, but otherwise, that's a town I think ready to soar. And so, I agree with you. Some of those towns, but again, water. I mean, you have enough water, right? I mean, that's still, some of these rivers have dried up pretty significantly. So it's very complicated. I think people would like to move to the American South in many cases. I think the weather, it's good for the rheumatism, all these kinds of things that you hear. Yeah. But there are some natural resource constraints, and that suggests that there's still life in the North left to live.
Yeah, understood. So we got you another 15 minutes, Dr. Basu. So remember, anybody here watching, if you have a question for Dr. Basu, please type it into the bottom right-hand corner. You see my photo next to the old voices, add a comment. Please type it in, but keep it clean, and I'll bring it to Dr. Basu's attention. So Dr. Basu, obviously, you're a very knowledgeable individual. You have a lot of information, but I got to ask you, like, what do you do when you're not working?
I'm reading, I read mostly crime fiction. Okay. I read a lot of crime fiction. I read a lot of, James Bond kind of stuff. I watch a lot of movies. I have a small home theater here, and so I have been watching Lord of the Rings. That's what I usually do. I'm work from home now. Okay. I've got a lot of flexibility. My entire staff is work from home now. We have 70 economists on our team. Everyone's work from home. They love it.
Is everybody in your team in Maryland, or are you kind of scattered all over the country?
No, we have most of them are in Maryland. They
Okay.
got couple in Florida, for instance, but most are in Maryland. Yeah,
Okay.
I hired them before the pandemic, and they've just stuck around here. But we're all remote, and so and I have to say, with respect to my younger employees, I notice more and more of them when I call them are not in front of their computer, but in fact are doing dry cleaning or at the dentist or digging in their car. I mean, it's starting, some of that's starting to slip, right?
Yeah,
Some of the discipline, but they still get the work done.
So, I mean, you made reference to movies because I've obviously one of the things I enjoy about your presentations is, peppered full of, pop culture, whether it be the Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, or whatever. So, I mean, you've always been a sci-fi kind of guy, or you just enjoyed movies, or where's this? How do you weave this all together?
I don't know that there's an economist who's not a sci-fi kind of person.
Okay.
Male or female. I mean, that's who we are. We're kind of geeky, I got to tell you. I mean, I didn't have a girlfriend in high school. I have one in college.
Yeah.
But I did read a lot of Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury, so Isaac Asimov, right? So, I mean, I enjoy that, all the Lord of the Rings fantasy stuff, and I couldn't get into Game of Thrones; it's just too realistic. But otherwise, I enjoy that kind of stuff. I'm married with 2 girls, as it turns out.
Very good. I had 2 girls as well. What are your daughter's ages?
Well, one turned 18 yesterday, and the other turns 25 today.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's a part of regret. Seeing your kids grow up is a hard thing, I find.
Yeah, it's true. No, it's a difficult stage, that's for sure.
It's difficult. When they, can talk back to you and you can't do anything about it because now they're a full-fledged adult. That's really tough.
Yeah.
But no, they're great girls. I've really enjoyed raising them. But now they're launching into their own things, and I stay busy with that.
Okay. So you travel quite a bit. I imagine both domestically and internationally. What are your favorite places to go to these days?
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, sometimes I get out of the country. So I love speaking in Vancouver, London. I have a client who brings me to the Bahamas every year. Another client that brings me to the Grand Cayman Island every year. Right. But most of my speaking is in the United States, the continental 48. And I really like towns like Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay.
Because Kansas City has incredible barbecue. And I know you're from Texas. You're going to push back on me. I get it.
Yeah. It's a different style. I hear you.
It may not be, it's very sweet. And I like that, as it turns out. You might not say it's authentic, but it is what it is. And I like it. So there's some cities that I have really enjoyed visiting in the past that I no longer enjoy as much.
Like what?
One of them is Portland, Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
I love speaking in Portland, Oregon. I would give clients discounts to invite me to Portland, Oregon. But now I won't do that because, again, there's some street level issues there. Homeless population, very large, so on and so forth. And I have nothing against them, of course, but it does make the streetscape unpleasant sometimes.
No, I mean, I used to go to Portland, Oregon before pandemic. It truly was one of my favorite places. It was such a small, confined, but walkable restaurants, cafes, bars. It was great. It was like a mini Manhattan, for lack of a better term. And then, I haven't been back, but everybody's been telling me it's just been taken in the teeth. And as a result, if you're afraid for yourself or your kids, you're not going to go. It's just part of how this works.
I'm not afraid because I'm from Baltimore. So, I'm not going to be afraid of anything. When you're from Baltimore, you're not afraid of anything. Exactly. When I'm walking down the street, people cross the street to the other side. You know what I mean? I don't. But it's about pleasantness, right? I think Denver's a beautiful city. But there's a part of Denver's downtown now where, the street level action is not that appealing. Yeah. And so, I hope big city mayors get a handle on this. And, you need to have people visit. You need to have them engage in business. You need them to shop and so on. So that's, people feeling safe and comfortable is at the heart of vibrant commerce. Correct. And too many city leaders have just neglected that aspect of economic life. And they let the graffiti grow and whatever it happens to be. And again, I don't mean to sound like a total square. I understand some graffiti can be very attractive, but some is very unattractive, very unappealing. And it makes one feel that they're in a chaotic environment. And we don't want that as human beings, generally speaking. We want order, predictability. And again, that leads to more vibrant commerce generally. And again, some cities are better about that than others.
Got a couple questions coming here before we finish up. What are your thoughts on the growth in Northwest Arkansas? Will that keep going strong? Also, thoughts on the El Paso market.
Yeah, Arkansas is an interesting state. It is not a state that's often studied, but it has some of the nicer communities in the country. Fayetteville, of course, famously, but some others. And so, with respect to the northwest quadrant of Arkansas, yes, I think that'll continue to be. It's a very strong area for throughput, like distribution, so on and so forth, the connective tissue between west and east. Some very nice communities there, and so yes, I would think Northwest Arkansas's outlook is, and Arkansas generally, I would say, has a pretty fine economic outlook given the value proposition there. With respect to the El Paso market, we've actually already talked about some similarly situated markets. I think it would be quite strong because it's a diverse economy.
Yeah.
And well situated for cross-border trade and so on and so forth, and has been, of course, for centuries. But no, I think the El Paso market, because of the value proposition again, because the big dense cities have become so expensive and in some cases less livable, a market like El Paso could be quite appealing to a lot of folks.
And for Mr. Deck, again, another question. When will the multifamily construction market recover?
When interest rates fall. So what we've seen is a decline in multifamily building permits. Still strong leasing activity. So you look at Austin, Texas, other places, still lots of people coming into town, leasing apartments, so on and so forth. But while multifamily building permits down, which is a leading indicator, of course, of multifamily construction, because developers are having a tough time lining up project financing. Yeah. And many bankers, we had, of course, the failure of Silicon Valley Bank March 10th of last year, basically a year and a day ago. Then March 12th, the failure of Signature Bank, and then the issues at First Republic and Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, and more recently, New York Community Bank Corp. And so bankers have become more conservative in their lending. They, generally speaking, don't want to be so exposed to real estate, whether commercial or multifamily. The regulators are scrutinizing their balance sheets more aggressively in the wake of the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, so on and so forth. And so project financing has dried up. And as a result, the multifamily market is, on the construction side at least, is not doing particularly well. So when would it come back? When project financing becomes easier. And when does that happen? When the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates, interest rates come down, and all of a sudden, pro formas pencil out again. There's only so much you can raise rents as a developer, and we've already raised them so much in this country. So we need the cost side to come down, and that means, for instance, the cost of capital. And I think it will come down over the next couple of years. So with respect to your question, I would think the multifamily market starts to come back a bit stronger in years like 2025 or 2026, maybe 2027. It depends on how quickly interest rates fall.
All right. Dr. Basu, you've been great. I got one final question for you. It's a hot question, too. Can you explain to me or provide any guidance or rationality for cryptocurrency?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
This, Brian, is a phenomenon that I misunderstood for a few years. So it's called cryptocurrency. So I looked at it as what? A currency. Okay, so money has three major roles to play. It is first a unit of account. Now, cryptocurrency as a unit of account is quite strong because of the underlying blockchain technology, has some really nice features for transaction verification, those kinds of things. So as a unit of account, cryptocurrency is just fine. It's also a store of value. As a store of value, it is lousy. Because one day it's 60,000, next day it's 69,000, then it's 66,000. And right now it's going up. It's been going up. And so people say, oh, it's a great store of value. It's not a great store of value. The $10 bill I have in my pocket, I know what it's going to buy tomorrow. It's going to buy roughly the same tomorrow as it does today. I do not know that with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. They're so volatile. The other thing is it's a medium of exchange. It's not a great medium of exchange. I can't buy a latte with it. I can buy a latte with my $10 bill, barely, but I can buy it. So I thought, oh, this cryptocurrency thing, it's all hype. No, I was wrong about this, Brian.
Okay.
Because cryptocurrency is decentralized finance, which sounds like fancy talk, but what it means is it's divorced from the Federal Reserve, the national debt, all these other policymakers out there. It's its own thing, decentralized. And so if the financial system ever falls apart, you got this other currency, your cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, whatever it happens to be, that still retains value because it's limited in terms of supply, and people now increasingly are using it. It's becoming more mainstream. We now have those 11 ETFs, Van Eck and others that you can invest in. So what I'm saying to you is it's a very powerful narrative. Okay. And so I'm starting to understand the value of cryptocurrency, why it's so popular, and why it probably ought to be part of people's baseline portfolio. If only 1% of the portfolio, it should probably be there because it's an asset that has some value and a really good narrative around it.
Fascinating. That's a fascinating answer, sir. I appreciate that. So, Dr. Basu, thank you so much for your time. This is fantastic. I mean, I always enjoy your conversations and listen to them. And thank you so much for being on my show. I wish you well. I look forward next time you're coming to Dallas.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Be well.
Bet.
Everyone.
So everybody, that's been another show of Risk On, Risk Off. I hope you enjoyed it. Like for me, this has been very exciting. I've really been a big fan of Dr. Basu for quite some time. If you ever get a chance to see him live, please do so. You can also subscribe to his newsletter on Substack, which I've been finding very beneficial and informative as well. And if you're out there watching this, if you've got a certain topic or individual you think you'd like to be in my show, please send me a note. I'd love to have them on if they got a good story to tell, like Dr. Basu. Also, you can subscribe to these videos and find them on my playlist at my YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter, which you can call Risk It All. You can get that on LinkedIn and Substack. Until next time, guys. Bye.